Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I am Michael Hansen, the CEO of Cengage, and I'm delighted today to be joined by two of our newest board members, Alexandra Bernadotte, the founder and CEO of Beyond 12, and Dr. Michael Lomax, who is the president and chief executive officer of UNCF, the United Negro College Fund. I am delighted also because I think we all can testify that we are coming up to the one-year anniversary of the pandemic hitting the United States, and clearly us individually and the communities that we live in and the society as large has suffered through a tremendous amount of disruption and pain. And I think it is fair to say that the education system in the United States is no exception. And it is, to me, a great point as we are reaching the one-year mark to start lifting our sights up and think about the opportunities that this disruption presents as well. Clearly, it has brought a great many challenges on us, but at the same time, there is opportunity to change things for the better, to do things in a different way, and to learn from the experiences that we had. So that is the topic of our discussion today, and I will start with Alex Bernadotte. And Alex, I want to combine two questions. One is, what got you to dedicate yourself to improving the education system? And if you give us a little bit of background about yourself, I think that would be very helpful.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here with both Michaels, surrounded by both Michaels as we have this conversation today. As Michael just said and shared, my name is Alex Bernadotte, and I am the founder and CEO of an organization called Beyond 12. We are a nonprofit whose mission is to significantly increase the number of students from under-resourced communities who graduate from college and who translate their degrees into what we like to say is meaningful employment and choice-filled lives. And we do that through a digital coaching platform that combines human coaches who work with students virtually, a campus-customized mobile app that reminds students of the activities, deadlines, and behaviors that lead to success, and then a back-end analytics engine that's powered by machine learning that allows us to predict which students need help and when, and prescribe the right type of support. So Michael, when you ask what got me into education, for me, it's very, very personal. I work in education in part to address some of the challenges that I faced as a first-generation college graduate. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I grew up in inner city Boston. I was raised by my beloved grandmother and by my parents. I landed at Dartmouth for my undergraduate studies. Even though I had a resume that indicated incredible preparation, I struggled with every aspect of college life, from the academic and the financial to the social and the emotional. And so when I reflect on my journey and my success, three things mattered. Hard work for sure, right? But so many of our students work really hard. But it was also the support of an incredible village, my family, my friends, and my mentors. And then the last thing is a fair bit of luck, a few lucky breaks at key moments in my life, especially as I was exploring and transitioning to college. Graduating from college shouldn't be about luck, but for so many students it is. So I do the work that I do to ensure that other students with backgrounds and stories similar to mine do not experience the same struggles that I experienced. And I do the work to remove luck from the success equation, particularly for Black and Brown students.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. For anybody who cares to know a little bit more about Alex's grandmother in particular, I was captivated by your TED Talk, which mentioned her very prominently and that element of support that she provided. So I would highly recommend it to all of our listeners. Turning to Dr. Michael Lomax, I know, Michael, you don't really need an introduction, but I would still like you to give an introduction to yourself and your connection to the education system.
Sure. Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Michael, and great to be with Alex. We're the newbies on the Cengage board, and so we're a cohort of two. So my background, so what is UNCF, United Negro College Fund? We're a 77-year-old social enterprise. We were founded by Black college presidents at the end of World War II who believed that the post-war opportunities that returning servicemen and women would require education to really take full advantage of it. And so that they created a United Negro College fundraising organization to raise money for Black colleges and Black college students. They enlisted John D. Rockefeller in that first campaign. They raised $750,000, the equivalent of about $10 million today. And over these 77 years, we've raised $5 billion, and we've supported over 500,000 students earn a college degree. So we have been, an engine of educational opportunity and social mobility and economic mobility for the Black community. My background's a little bit different from Alex's, although we both share Haitian roots. My Haitian roots go back to one of my great grandmothers, and who lived in Charleston, South Carolina, but she was from Haiti. And and unlike Alex, I've been blessed to come from a family which has enjoyed higher education now since the 19th century. But I'm older, and I have seen how inequitable and unequal education is in the United States. And I really saw it for the first time when I went south in 1961 and attended a segregated school. I know that education makes such a huge difference. And I had a grandmother, just like Alex, who believed in education. She was the first college graduate, woman college graduate in our family. She graduated from Fisk University in 1907. And she went on to earn another bachelor's degree at the University of Chicago and a master's degree at the University of Chicago. And she told me that education mattered and I should be a teacher. And I have done everything my grandmother told me to do. And I hope I have made her proud.
Absolutely. And it feels to me that we could have an entire dialogue about the power of grandmothers and the importance of women in society and education to begin with.
Amen.
But I do want to do that as a separate talk, maybe down the road. But what I will say is, and I'd be curious in both of your senses about this. I think with all the progress that has been made, which we should acknowledge, and both of you have clearly contributed to this, I think the pandemic has in many ways accelerated some of the inequities and has really shone a light on the fact how quickly and how fragile our progress is. If I just look at from the Cengage perspective, what we have seen over the last 12 months is a very uneven development of college enrollments for Black and brown students and lower income students relative to average other students. Significant declines in enrollment there. And I know, Michael, you see some of the same numbers in your system. It is a cause of grave concern for me, for the society at large, not only the education system. Michael, maybe starting with you on this one, what do you think is the most pressing problem right now, given COVID and the overlay of that?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. The progress has been fragile, and I worried from the very beginning of COVID, even before we saw the inequitable, disparate impact it was having on Black and brown communities, that we ran the risk of losing a whole generation of Black students. I'm focused on Black college students, but I was at a KIPP charter school board meeting yesterday. And we know that this is affecting students at every point along the education trajectory. So we're seeing, Black and brown low-income students in public schools not getting the educational opportunities that their more privileged peers are getting. We're seeing Black college students enrollment, particularly in community college, drop by double digits. One of the things that I can say gives me a glimmer of hope is that in historically Black colleges, the decline in enrollment has been less than 10%, largely because we were very proactive as a community in addressing some of these concerns. But, we're already seeing across all of higher education, except the most elite and privileged institutions, we're seeing declines in applications. And I think that, this is another consequence that we're going to see progress in expanding educational opportunity to Black and brown, low income, but all people is going to be taking a real kick in the gut as a result of COVID.
Alex, from your perspective, I mean, you're seeing it day to day, interacting with students as well. What do you see as the major impact right now of the COVID pandemic?
I think it's exactly what both of you have already talked about, right? We're seeing these significant declines in enrollment. According to the National Student Clearinghouse, for the class of 2020, college enrollment, plummeted by 22% overall compared with 2019, and then more than 33% for graduates of high poverty high schools, right? As Dr. Lomax was just talking about. And I think the number that is particularly alarming, again, that both of you have alluded to, is the decline in enrollment at community colleges. I think in past years, when there's been an economic downturn, our community colleges have been the engines, right, of fueling economic growth. And we've seen in the past, right, the community college enrollment goes up as folks think about reskilling, as folks are leaving the workplace, but that's not what we've seen this year. As Dr. Lomax said, we've seen a 10% decline. And so that's really alarming. And I think the biggest challenge for us now is, how do we ensure that these short-term declines, or that these declines that we're seeing, do not permanently, right, result in derailing our students, particularly our students who are most vulnerable, our Black and brown students, our students from under-resourced communities. Because these challenges amount to more than just a series of individual tragedies. Like, we have, through the coaching that we're doing with students, we have individual stories, but they represent the lost economic mobility for young people and their families, and potentially the progress of an entire generation. So there just has never been a more important time for us to focus on equity and focus on redesigning, because we risk losing significant populations of our students.
If I could just add a little bit to that, I think the question is, why is it that in this economic decline, people aren't, immediately rushing off to get reskilled and upskilled? I think there are a couple of reasons. Number one is they're having to work. They're having to work. They're having to take, whatever job they can find to keep food on the table, to keep, a roof over their heads. And what we're hearing back from our students is they are trying to they are now breadwinners for their families, because older family members are ill or dying at the worst of the pandemic. They're also caregivers for younger siblings because children are at home, they're not. So there's just a lot that's happening that is really making it hard to be a student. And that for so many people, low income, first generation Black folks, they don't have access to Wi-Fi, and they don't have access to devices that enable them to remain in school and to balance, work and getting an education. Some of them, all they have is a cell phone, and they're taking courses on a cell phone. So, I think that the degree of difficulty has just gotten way bigger. And, I think that we're going to have to look to all hands on deck in this country to address this, both in terms of helping these people, these young people, get the educations they need, but also delivering education in ways which enable them to take advantage of it without maybe always being in a classroom, but having the capability to do this technologically.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on this point, Michael, because I think it is so critical. You mentioned it will require an all-out national effort. This is not about tweaking things here and there. This will require an effort, and Alex, you referenced the numbers. I mean, the declines are massive. I mean, it is truly, as you said, Michael, there is a risk of losing an entire generation here. This is not a risk of a drop here and there. How do, you know, and the other thing I just want to state around this is I do believe that the education system, all of us need to challenge ourselves also to make it easier for students to access the system. And that has a lot to do for me with affordability. It has a lot to do with a rigid system. We ask people to enroll for a certain period of time, then you get a degree, etc. And I think technology now affords us to be actually a lot more flexible and do things in smaller increments. Give people certificates as opposed to giving them a degree, and that will help them to get a better job. So I do think we have a challenge for all of us, and I want to pivot it to those practical solutions, but I don't want to move on without elaborating a little bit on the point of an all-out national effort. And I would love for both of you to comment on, to the extent that we have seen things come out of the new Biden administration, how do you judge it? What is your sense of what the new administration, as the federal administration, is doing? Does it make sense? Doesn't it make sense? And Michael, you wrote I thought, an extremely thoughtful piece in The Atlantic a few days ago. And I'd love, again, to start with you. Sort of, what's your sense? Are we at the cusp of an all-national effort, or are we going to go down into sort of piecemealing it?
Well, I think that the Biden administration is sort of learning from the mistakes, I want to be careful how I say this, of the Obama administration. You know, Obama came in at a really low point in the economy, and he chose healthcare as a solve. And it's been a divisive issue, a very important one, but a divisive issue. And there was a lot of talk at that time about, well, shouldn't he have had a Public Works Act? And shouldn't he have invested in job training and job placement? I believe that what you're going to see after this, the first thing that the Biden administration is doing is crisis management on the disease, get everybody a vaccine. And on the stimulus, they're saying stabilize. And that's what I think they're doing by giving money to people, allowing them to stay in their homes, giving them the wherewithal to pay for food and the things they need. But I think right behind that, Michael, is there. I'm hearing that there will be something like a $3 trillion Public Works Act, and that Public Works Act is a jobs act, and it's gonna be a job training act, because the people who will need to get those jobs will need retraining. But the skills, they're not going to be brick masons, and they're not going to be doing manual labor. They're going to be using. They're going to need rudimentary technological capabilities. They're going to have to be upskilled for the 21st century, not for the 20th century. Absolutely. And so I really do think that this is an opportunity for education to say, we're all in. And maybe folks aren't going to be getting a straight line from a freshman year to a bachelor's degree, but they could be building stackable credentials that will be part of a maybe longer term getting from being a high school graduate to having a solid post-secondary set of credentials that enable them to earn a good living in the 21st century. And so I see there's a big role for education. There's a big role for job training and upskilling. And we're just going to have to say that, again, all of higher education has got to play at this. And because otherwise we're going to lose our prominence as the global leader in the economy of the world.
No question about it. And I can just add, a data point from our perspective. And as you guys are getting more and more into the Cengage business, that we have an online skills business, which does exactly this, what you are just describing, giving people for like $1,500 a course, giving them something tangible, either in medical coding or in HVAC technicians or in computer programming, that they can take literally to the bank. They can take to an employer and say, here, I have a skill that is relevant and that is tied to what you're actually looking for. And Alex, from your perspective, are you seeing the same thing in the demand with the students that you're working with? Are you seeing that ask coming through of more flexibility and give me something that is stackable and helps me get a job?
Absolutely. And this has been a trend. And I, again, will agree with everything that Dr. Lomax has said in terms of really focusing on upskilling, really focusing on a better connection, particularly between our community colleges and workforce, right? Trying to give our students more hands-on practical experiences as they're earning their credentials and also as they're earning their degrees, right? I think that's an important component of what we're seeing, what we're hearing for students. That's on the one hand. I think on the other hand, we actually need employers, right, to move to become skills-based and degree agnostic, because we keep talking about this degree agnostic utopia that we're moving into. But so many of employers are still using these old standards, right? It is still about the sort of exclusivity of the institution that you attended, still about asking questions about the GPA, that you were able to achieve. And so I see this tension and this friction, right? That like on the demand side, like absolutely, I think our students are asking for more flexibility. I think we need to think about, just different skills and different pathways for our students. But we got to change that on the other side as well. And employers have to change their recruiting systems to reward, this kind of skills-based approach. And until we do that and we combine the two, I fear that we are going to sort our Black and Brown students, right, into these sort of skills-based pathways and not have those skills have genuine economic value, right, in the market where employers are actually making hiring decisions based on those skills. I think the other thing that I would add to the equation, just in terms of the Biden administration, I think jobs and affordability, jobs is definitely a key thing. I would also suggest that we continue to focus on affordability, right? Systems like FAFSA and Pell Grants and federal work study were created to address unequal access to higher education, but the systems have become cumbersome for administrators, unclear for students and parents, and it's making it difficult for the aid that we do have to be delivered where it's most needed. So I would recommend continuing to focus on the other end as well, simplifying the pathways to federal aid, making college costs transparent for students and parents, and then ensuring equitable distribution of higher education resources. I think there's a real opportunity for the administration to focus on those aspects of it as well.
Yeah, on the access side of this, we're pushing, and I've been pushing this for the last 3 years, doubling the Pell Grant. I mean, it's just, that's not, there does have to be reform to the borrowing, but for so many of the people that we're very focused on, taking a Pell Grant from $6,000 to $13,000 will make a huge, huge difference. And then I would just say on the employer side, I think that we're beginning to see that there's competency-based assessment. I mean, they're starting to say, I have a daughter who is an engineer, and she dropped out of college because she felt she had the competencies that were required. And nobody asked to see, where's your degree? They gave her a coding assignment, and if she could do it elegantly and on time, she got a job. And I do think that there's going to be more of that. And I think people are going to be, some people are just going to be a little bit surprised that that degree that they spent $100,000 on is not going to get them the job that they would like to have today.
And I think the people are surprised and actually have been surprised for a while, right? I mean, one of the statistics I love to cite is we have 10 million unemployed, countless underemployed, and 6 million job openings.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that equation, right? Something doesn't fit in this equation. And I do think it is exactly what you're saying, that the skill sets that a degree used to signal is not necessarily there from an employer perspective, and employers need to be more flexible. And I'm speaking as, leading one of those employers. We have about 4,500 people around the world, 3,000 in the US. We constantly have job openings, and we are guilty as charged, Alex, to your point, to traditionally have a very rigid system. You got to have these degrees, etc., but not really doing the hard work of defining what does this role really require, and can we have an assessment like, Michael, your daughter got, that will get us access to a completely different labor pool and allow us to fill the job quicker than we did before. So I think it is really back to this is a joint responsibility. We can only reform the system if everybody takes responsibility. And what we shouldn't be doing is pointing fingers of who does things or whatever, which unfortunately happens, often, that people are always looking at the other side of the equation. Or the other side of the people. But I do think employers are starting to take it seriously. I see companies like Google, like Amazon, taking a very different approach to this. But I think it's important that we also acknowledge it has to happen fast, because it can't be that we are on this 10-year journey of everybody reevaluating the risk. I mean, what stuck with me from our conversation most so far has been the conversation about a generation lost. And if we're losing a generation of Black and brown students, if we're losing a generation of students with lower income families living in the Midwest, et cetera, and have them permanently under or unemployed, I think we're not only, I would argue, we're not only losing our place in the global economy, I would say we're starting to lose the cohesion of our society. We're starting to lose something very, very important in this. So in that spirit of a bit more sort of sense of urgency, what would you like, Alex, to see in 12 months? When you look 12 months from now and you look back, what are your top 2 or 3 things that you think, I hope we have accomplished that as an education system?
So here are a couple of things, Michael, that's such a good question. So a couple of things that I want to say about the premise of this conversation that is connected to my response, right? Those of us who are in education and I think who work in systems have been fond of saying that the system is broken. I want to suggest that our education system is not broken. Systems achieve the outcomes they are designed to achieve. The inequitable outcomes that we know of too well that we're talking about are not the result of a broken system, but the impact of a system that is functioning just as it has been designed, right? To open the path of opportunity for a select few and close it for many others. Higher education was designed to compound privilege. And so for me, one of the things that I'd like to see happen over the next 12 months is for us to change the frame and to recognize that. And again, particularly in higher education, which is where I work, it's a place where we take the most financially supported students with the best academic preparation and we place them in the institutions with the most resources. So that's why any solution that's not rooted in systems redesign, no matter how bold, will only continue to achieve incremental results. So for me, a big part of what needs to happen over the next 12 months is we need to recognize that we're not talking about a broken system, and therefore we can't tinker our way to get equitable outcomes, that we have to use this as an opportunity for bold, just redesign. And so a couple of specific things that I see. When the pandemic started and students, the students that we serve were having to scramble to either do online learning or to leave campuses, we found a way to give them emergency aid, right? Just small micro scholarships because students said, I need cash to be able to address some of these pieces. And all of a sudden we found the will to do it. Like we found ways to mobilize and give students money where pre-pandemic, it was such a big laborious process and we had to have debates. But somehow in March, April, and May, we found ways to get students cash, right? So that they can address. So are there ways for us to be able to deploy capital through federal aid, but also through these emergency relief funds to students who are experiencing housing insecurity, food insecurity, and who have all of these other financial challenges? We finally found that we had a will and we found a way, to be able to make those happen. On the K-12 end, to solve the technology divide for students. The debate pre-pandemic had been, we can't trust students, we can't send them home with laptops. Somehow we thought that their families or their communities weren't going to, they weren't going to be good shepherds or stewards, right, of the technology that we gave them. In the pandemic, we found a way to do it. We found a way to give, and I know that divide still exists, but there were school districts who actually mobilized resources, right, to ensure that every single one of their students had access to a platform and to hubs, like Wi-Fi hubs and hotspots to be able to engage in online learning. So again, we found a way to galvanize the resources because we had a will to be able to do those things. And so I'd like to ensure that post-pandemic, and as we think about the recovery, that we are able to deploy resources and capital as quickly as we were able to do it during the pandemic to the communities that need them the most, right? So those are just a few of the examples for me, but I think the biggest piece is, can we stop saying the system is broken? Can we say that it is actually operating as it should, and therefore redesign it so that it is achieving equitable outcomes?
I love it, Alex, because I've been quoted as somebody who was saying the system is quoted, and you in this conversation convinced me that I'm actually wrong and you're right. The system is not broken. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Unfortunately, what it's supposed to do is not the right thing to do for our community and for for the outcome that we want to achieve. So I point very well taken. Michael, what's your wish for the wish list for the next 12 months?
Well, as you know, somebody who really is into scholarships, I don't have to speak as eloquently about it as and I can't as Alex has. I just really want to underscore that emergency scholarship support. What gets the obstacle that seems a small one to some people can be an existential obstacle for young people who don't have anything. And we've given out, I don't know how many millions of dollars in emergency aid over the last 12 months. With all sorts of partners. We just did $1 million yesterday with the Washington football team. We're getting ready to do something with the NBA. And these wind up being $1,500, $2,000, $2,500. And they do, they help students get the technology they need, the access to Wi-Fi they need, the food that they need, the shelter that they need. I mean, these are very basic, immediate needs. So I would underscore that as well. I really believe that we've got to find more really high quality, innovative, continuous improvement online learning platforms. We're building one called HBCU Virtual that we are doing for our 37 HBCUs and anybody else who wants to join in. We're designing it. We're getting faculty. They're going to have the capability to use this effectively, and it's going to be student friendly, because while there will be in-person learning going forward, there have got to be these online and user-friendly, not just efficient, but user-friendly environments for students to learn using digital platforms. And there need to be more of them. We believe HBCUV will be an important one. I want to see a greater focus on meaningful career education. And that every young person who is on this post-secondary journey, and really even before they begin that, they've got to know where they're trying to go, and they've got to be able to get those increments of learning and education that will prepare them for the kinds of jobs of the future. And that all of their learning is not only just stackable credentials, but it's stackable internships, so that they're actually getting to put to practice what they're learning in the classroom. And then the final thing I would say is that we just have to continue to invest in the students who have the most needs and the institutions that serve them. In America, the richest institutions serve the people with the greatest wealth. Harvard has a $40 billion endowment. All of the historically Black colleges together have less than a $4 billion endowment. Harvard, 1% of Harvard students are low income. 75% of the students who attend Black colleges are low income. I don't want to take anything from Harvard, but what I would say to the great wealth of this country is they've got to invest in those institutions that are engines of economic and social and educational mobility. The great abolitionist Frederick Douglass said, knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. It was in the 19th century. It is the pathway from poverty to economic opportunity in this country today.
No question about it. I would agree. And let me add a personal note as well on the point that you made, Michael, around this seeing the works environment much more interwoven with the education environment, and stackable internships, etc. And as you both know, I emigrated to this country about 35 years ago from Germany, and I will say, while there are many things you can say about the German education system that are not flattering, one thing they actually figured out very well is to make the system connected between the employers and the workspace. And I'm not saying this without data. Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, who are the only three countries that have that system, have for 20 years lower youth unemployment than regular unemployment, than average unemployment. That speaks for itself. It does work. We can look actually at systems there where that connectivity happens. And frankly, as an employer, I would say this is such an obvious payback. Imagine that you hire somebody and you don't have your typical 50-50 odds that that person is going to work out, but you have almost a 90% guarantee because she or he knows what this job is about, has in fact practiced aspect of the job before, had an internship before. The enormous cost savings are material and are absolutely critical for a for-profit enterprise. So in that respect, it is a win-win. And I come back to your point, Alex, is like, as long as we understand it as a system and we understand how we can change the system fundamentally in order to deliver these job-ready skills, I think we'll make a step in the right, in absolutely the right direction. So I appreciate that. Now, I do want to pivot because we gave our audience a chance to submit questions beforehand, and there have been a lot of questions coming in. So I do want to pivot to some of those questions. And I will say, we and I selected a few, and let me start with one who is coming from a college professor, and it might take us in a slightly different direction, but I love this question also as a father, so bear with me. It is a college professor, her name is Essie Childers, and she said, "It is disturbing for me to see students lack executive functioning skills like time management, problem solving, teamwork, ability to apply critical thinking, and other skills." She's asking whether the system should consider implementing a boot camp or a gap year for students before entering college or university. Any views on this?
I mean, I would say that our K-12 system is supposed to be the boot camp, right? To prepare, like adding another sort of layer to an education system for me feels, again, not like redesign, right? It feels like we're tinkering around that. I mean, I think it's an astute observation, right? But I think that observation, sometimes we blame students, right, for not having developed those skills rather than the system, right? That like we know that there is a significant disconnect between our K-12 system and our higher education system. The requirements, that we have of our K-12 system for students to graduate are often misaligned with our expectations of what students should be able to do when they get into college. So I would argue that boot camp needs to be feedback that we bring back to our K-12 system to really, and again, I don't want to point fingers and say it's K-12 or higher education, but I think the feedback loops that we need to create throughout the education pipeline, so we understand the skills that students need to be successful at the next step. So I would just suggest that we start with employers and then backwards map, right? Like, what does it take for students to be successful in the workforce? And then backwards map it. So then what does that mean in terms of the skills that they need to accumulate in some sort of post-secondary institution? And then map that back to what does that mean in terms of our K-12 system? So I would just say that it's a systems redesign challenge rather than a student challenge.
Well, I think it's also an opportunity.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
It's also an opportunity challenge. I want to go back to what you said about European, apprenticeships. Apprenticeships were a part of the German and the Swiss experience. And I know in my own life that I started working when I was in middle school. Junior high was what we called it back in the day. And I had a paper route, but my real first job where I had to have my Social Security was shelving books in the library. I had to get on the bus after school, go to the library, do the work, get home and do my homework. I had to learn how to manage time. And I did that because I was getting rewarded for doing that. I was earning a paycheck. I think there's a real disconnect for so many young people between what they are learning and what they're being challenged, the skills they're being challenged to adopt, and their personal experience. So I think that really beginning that work experience and that reward experience earlier in life is critical. I think that needs to be happening at 9th and 10th grade for young people. And that might help address the issue that the professor is raising.
Absolutely. And I would just add to the asks, I also have an ask for parents in this country. And maybe that's being an immigrant. Stop helicoptering your children forever. Right? I mean, just give them the chance. I agree with you. Like, let them take the bus, be out there, make mistakes, fall on their face and whatever. Maybe that's a reflection of having lived 35 years in New York City, that I'm surrounded by helicopter parents. But I do believe giving them a chance to fail for parents is also a very important foundational element in that. So couldn't agree more with you. Let me finish with one question, which comes back to the issue of affordability. And it actually comes back in many respects, Alex, to your point about a system redesign. And this is a question that came from Amy Grothaus-Turner. And she shared a personal experience with us. And she said she's just visited college campuses to look for, I don't know, one of her children, son or daughter. And she noticed the elaborate amenities, Olympic-sized pools, rock climbing walls, dorm room with granite countertops, and more. This one-upmanship attitude that college campuses have around amenities, combined with requiring younger students to live on campus, increases the cost of higher ed. How significant of an impact this has on the cost of higher education, I'm not sure, but isn't that also a potential solve?
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh no,
Tackle
Dr.
the pool.
Lomax, this one's all you. This one's all you.
I will look. Let me just say, whoever this parent is, she was not visiting any historically Black colleges, because I do think that we have gone way overboard. These college should be a little bit more on the rough it side. It certainly should be safe. I think there's a lot to be said for the campus experience for it's not going to happen for everybody. And that's the minority. The minority of students who are pursuing post-secondary education are 18 to 21-year-olds who are going directly from high school onto college campuses, living in a dormitory. That's about if it is a quarter, it's a quarter of all people pursuing higher education. The rest of the folks are doing this episodically. They're going in and out. They're working another job. They are hustling to get this education. And I would focus much more of my attention on how we make it work for them, how we give them the access to the technology, how we ensure that the education that they're receiving through online learning and blended learning is high quality, that they're getting the opportunity to balance their work life with their learning life, with their family life. I think those are the bigger challenges that we face right now. There are a bunch of people who are, getting, even more privilege and more cushy opportunities. I don't believe they're going to be the resilient, hardworking, persistent, and determined people that I would look to be in my organization.
Alex, final thought?
Yeah, the final thought is I think Dr. Lomax is right. The competitive colleges, the idyllic campuses tend to capture our imagination when we talk about college, but they actually don't represent the majority of the experience, right? For most students in the country. I mean, I think it's nearly something like 43% of undergraduate students in the US start at a community college. And in California, where I am, that's 61%, for California students that start at a community college. So I think it is a problem, definitely, of the elaborate campuses. But I think when we need to broaden, what we think about when we say college, because that is not actually the majority of it doesn't represent the majority of the campuses where students are actually attending. Vast majority are attending under-resourced community colleges, right? Where the financial equation is a bit different.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with everything you said. I do think that the kernel of very much truth in that question is though that we need to challenge everything in the education system and ask ourselves the question, what is really adding value? And can we do it in a different way? To the question that you raised, Michael, beforehand, like what parts of the education could we potentially deliver digitally, online? What can we do in a cost-effective way for $1,000 as opposed to $30,000? And I do think that continuous probing of all participants, I do think is incredibly important and will hopefully deliver the progress that both of you have so aptly articulated that we want to have over the next 12 months. Let me end by saying thank you, first of all. Secondly, I warned you that this was an experiment. So this is LinkedIn Live. They experimented with it. We are experimenting with it. But based on my personal experience over the last 45 minutes, I can tell you that I would be very surprised if it weren't a success. I tremendously enjoyed the conversation with both of you. I thought we hit on some important topics, and I am looking forward to continuing this a bit as a series because I do think voices like Dr. Lomax's voice and Alex Bernadotte's voice need to be heard, and I think we need to all contribute to the improvement of the education system. So a very warm and heartfelt thanks, and I'm looking forward to continuing to working with you even closer over the next few months and years to come.
Thank you.
Thank you both.